Good afternoon. I'm Tom Cochran, the CEO and Executive Director of the United States Conference of Mayors. Welcome to the next in our series of local infrastructure hub webinars on the direct or elective pay program at the U.S. Department of Treasury. We want to thank Bloomberg Philanthropies and Results for America for co-hosting today's event with us and being such a great partners in the hub, as we call it. We believe that the direct pay program is one of the most innovative programs for cities and nonprofits in the President Biden's Infrastructure Reduction Act. It's a new approach that allows cities to take advantage of a variety of renewable energy and carbon reduction tax credits that previously were available only to the private sector. Now they're available to the public sector. The program could not be more timely or urgent. Just last week, I joined hundreds of mayors across this world who attended the United Nations COP28 conference in Dubai, and that we learned what we already knew. Cities will play and must play a critical role in responding to the need to limit greenhouse gas emissions. As a global community, we will need a staggering 60% reduction in GHG emissions by 2035 to prevent global temperatures from rising to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So it's time for us to, new thinking and also dramatic action. The direct program will help us get there. It's a new tool in your toolbox to expedite the development of renewable energy projects and other strategies. We're pleased today to hear from excellent city speakers. I want to give a great shout out to the Columbia, South Carolina Mayor Dan Rickenmann, who chairs our Energy Committee. He will play a key role in helping us to promote this new program to cities across the nation. Thanks to all for joining us today. All of you are on the front lines doing this important work. We need your commitment, expertise, and leadership now more than ever. Let me now introduce our MC for this webinar, the CEO of RFA, David Medina. David, welcome.
Great, Tom. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Medina, and I'm the co-founder and COO of Results for America. And as Tom just mentioned, today's session will explore the types of projects that the IRA direct pay program can help finance, from electrifying public vehicles and investing in community solar efforts to transitioning municipal utilities to renewable energy sources. Direct pay is a critical tool to enable cities to expand the implementation of their clean energy plans. And so today we'll be hearing from experts and local leaders who have successfully used direct pay to advance their clean energy projects. First today, I'm pleased to welcome David EIchenthal. He's the Senior Advisor for Policy Implementation and Delivery at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Welcome, David. The Zoom is yours.
David, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining. It's really great to have the opportunity to chat with you all today and give these brief opening remarks. Because I'm what's standing between you and the panel, I'll try and be brief. I've talked to a number of the local leaders who are participating on the panel today and have learned so much about the really exciting work that they're doing. I want to start by saying that as somebody who is all of 7 months new to the federal government, but has spent the last 3 decades working in and with state and local governments, specifically around budget and finance issues, the direct pay provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act may be one of the most significant innovations in public finance that I've seen throughout my career. You heard Tom say it, you heard David say it. This is really an opening of an extraordinary opportunity to local governments to do things that they simply could not do before in terms of financing the clean energy transition. There are huge benefits to it. Some people have raised issues about risks. Some people have raised questions about compliance. There are risks, there are compliance issues, but what I'll tell you is that the benefits far outweigh them, and that they're really the same sort of compliance questions and risk questions that local governments have faced for years when it comes to virtually any type of new revenue source. So here's what I want to try and do in my opening remarks. First, I'm going to briefly introduce the Inflation Reduction Act. I think it generally needs no introduction for a lot of the people on this call. I want to talk generally about the potential role for local governments around its implementation, and then talk specifically about what direct pay is, how it works, and how, if you've got projects that are going and have gone into service this year, how you could apply for the benefits of direct pay with direct payments from the IRS. You can go to the next slide. Very quick ground rules. I've told you what I am going to say. Here's what I can't do. I can't provide tax advice. The content in this presentation is based on proposed and temporary regulations and other tax guidance on irs.gov. I encourage folks who are on this call to look at that, look at the FAQs, and by the way, talk to your finance directors in your local government if you haven't already, to make sure that they're part of the process. You go to the next slide. So the Inflation Reduction Act, it's the largest investment in clean energy in US history. What's different about it is that the bulk of the investments are going to flow through the tax code instead of through direct government spending. Some of you have seen some of the grant programs under IRA. I hope you're all applying for those, but the bulk of the spending that's going to come through the Inflation Reduction Act is going to come through the tax credit provisions. And here's the news. The Inflation Reduction Act is creating jobs, it's saving consumers money, it's accelerating the transition to clean energy, it will reduce volatility in the cost of energy, and will increase the nation's energy independence, all as it addresses the fundamental challenges that we face when it comes to our environment. We know what the track record is so far in terms of the unprecedented investments in electric vehicle and battery manufacturing, in clean energy manufacturing, and in clean energy projects. You go to the next slide. So how should local governments be thinking about the Inflation Reduction Act and their role in implementation? I've started to think about this as really sort of 5 different pieces, right? So there's a direct role, some of which is can be funded through the direct pay provisions of tax credits, that involves incorporating clean energy projects into the basic capital planning work of local government. It's about solar panels. It's about microgrids. Some of it is about shifting the types of energy that local governments consume. Think of how dramatically different government fleets are going to look at the local government level from where they are today to where they are in 5 years, 10 years, and going into the future. There are other things, though, that local government can do to help ensure effective implementation of the IRA tax credits. That's less about direct pay, more about thinking about the role that IRA tax credits can play in terms of community and economic development strategies involving local nonprofits and involving the private sector. And then local governments can do what they've been doing, I think in some cases for decades, in terms of promoting the benefits under certain federal tax credits, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit Program. They could be promoting them to consumers and businesses as they transition within their communities to clean energy. Go to the next one. So there are a number of different ways to think about local government, how it does all of these things. What I'll say simply here is a lot of you, through the good work of the Local Infrastructure Hub, have been applying best practices around collaboration and coordination and focusing on equity as you move forward with infrastructure investments. That same sort of playbook, that same sort of approach works for implementation of the IRA as well. Next one. So what is direct pay? In some respects, it's pretty simple and straightforward. I think Tom said it, right? For years, the private sector has been able to take advantage of certain tax credits when it comes to building qualifying energy projects, when it comes to making qualifying investments. What the direct pay provision allows is for applicable entities, including local governments, including school districts, including many nonprofits, to take advantage of the full value of those tax credits as well. It's basically a process where local governments are going to have to go through a pre-filing registration process with the IRS, filing a return, and then they get the money back from the Internal Revenue Service. I'll talk about some of the details in those steps at the end of the presentation. Go to the next slide. So there are really 4 different categories of tax credits or where direct pay is applicable. It's 12 different tax credits across 4 categories. Category 1 is energy generation and carbon capture. Category 2 is manufacturing. Category 3 is vehicles, and category 4 is fuels. Most of what local governments are going to focus on has to do with energy generation and has to deal with the credits with regard to vehicles. But depending on your local government, depending on the types of projects you're looking at, I would encourage folks to look across all 12 credits to see if there are opportunities with direct pay. How much do you get? Well, the statutory provisions related to each of the credits define that. But what's very important here, and we'll talk about it more in a second, is looking to the applicability of various different bonus provisions. Those are provisions that sort of have to do with high road employment. So think about prevailing wage, thinking about apprenticeship participation requirements, and have to do with really place-based thinking in terms of bonuses related to investments in economically challenged communities. It's important to look at those bonus provisions as you think about how to structure and finance specific projects, because as you'll see, it moves the numbers considerably. We go to the next one. So this is the long list, right, of the 12 tax credits. All of this information is available on the IRS website at irs.gov, and you'll see at the end of the presentation a number of references to where you could find this information. But remember what I said about the importance of some of those bonuses. So if you're looking at something like an investment tax credit for renewable energy projects, the baseline is 6% of the qualified investment. But if you meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, that goes to 30%. You go to the next slide and the one after that. So here are the principal bonus provisions, right? So as I said, prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. There's a domestic content bonus. There's a bonus related to locating projects within designated energy communities. These are communities that were reliant upon coal and coal-fired power plants. There's a bonus related to low-income communities as well. There's an allocation process with regard to that. But all of these bonuses stack up. Well, how do they stack up? You can go to the next slide. So if you look at specific sorts of examples of how direct pay could be used. So you're looking at replacing your municipal vehicle fleet with new electric vehicles and with associated charging infrastructure. Well, if you're replacing a light vehicle, the relevant tax credit is $7,500 or up to $7,500. If it's a larger vehicle, it could be up to $40,000, and it's up to 30% credit on investment in charging equipment. But then let's talk about those bonus provisions as they apply to installing a microgrid with solar and energy storage, something you'd want to do to serve critical infrastructure and facilities during emergencies and if there are grid outages. Well, that credit amount, again, remember, starts at a baseline of 6%, but it could go as high as 50% because all of those different bonuses could stack up. Same thing if you were thinking about developing a geothermal system to provide heating to community buildings and residential households. So again, the potential here to make projects that were hard to figure out how to finance to ones that make sense when you pencil it out on paper is just extraordinary. You go to the next slide. Great thing about some of this stuff, I haven't seen any city finance officers raise their hands in the chat, but as a former city finance officer, I'm willing to bet that at least some of them who are talking to some of you who aren't CFOs are like, well, yeah, but what does this mean in terms of cost? Well, some of these direct pay investments could potentially reduce cost over time. So you're both getting the benefit of the potential tax credit to reduce the cost of financing a project, and it is a project that potentially saves local government money in the long run. Next slide. So what do you do with all of this? Well, so how do you claim, how do you receive a direct payment? Well, first you've got to identify the project you're looking at. That's why don't think about this as having a direct pay plan for your local government, right? Think about what your clean energy transition plan is. Think about what the projects are that are in it, and think about those projects where direct pay becomes an important tool for accomplishing and implementing that project. So you identify the project, you complete the project and put it into service. You determine the tax year, if you don't already know what it is, to determine when your tax return will be due. You complete a pre-filing registration with the IRS. We are absolutely committed to doing this by the end, having a pre-filing registration process in place by the end of the year. Some of you may have seen some stuff online. We're in a soft launch of that right now to make sure that we work out some of the bugs in the system, but you will be seeing the opportunity to do pre-filing registration before the end of this month, because that is the end of the year. Then finally, you file your tax return by the due date or by an extended due date. There's an automatic extension that's allowed in terms of the filing, and make a valid election for payment. And then you receive a payment after the return is processed. So that's what direct pay is. That's how local governments might want to think about direct pay as this really vital tool, a really vital tool for moving forward with the clean energy transition. As I said, if you go to irs.gov, elective pay, sometimes it's direct pay, sometimes it's elective pay, you'll see a bunch of different resources. I really encourage people to look at the frequently asked questions. Go to the next slide. And there's also information at cleanenergy.gov. There it's direct pay. And there's also information from the White House and an overall approach to how to implement the Inflation Reduction Act more generally. Let me stop there. Thank you so much for your attention.
David, that was fantastic information, very well presented in your slide deck and your overview. Just so everyone knows, we will be sharing all of these slides on our website. There's also a link in the chat. Our first question is from Melissa in Green Bay. Melissa, if you want to come forward and just ask your question, David.
Sure. Hi, I'm Melissa from Green Bay, Wisconsin. We're thinking we're going to be doing a piloting of some solar PV and also electric vehicles for our police department. And I'm wondering, for the specifically for solar PV, do the bonus credits stack on top of the base 30% tax credit? So for example, much of Green Bay is located or considered an energy community. So would that additional 5 or 10% be on top of the 30%?
So the baseline for the investment tax credit for solar, I believe, is 6%, right? If you comply with the prevailing wage and the apprenticeship requirements, you get up to the 30% number. If you then meet the requirements of the other bonuses, yes, it's stackable. That's how, in the example that I cite, you go from 6% to up to 50%.
Okay. So this would not be a solar project necessarily. I mean, it would be a smaller type project, rooftop solar, to offset 20 to 30% of a building's usage. So does that make any difference as far as, is the base credit still only 6% for small facility type projects?
I think you would want to look at the specifics under the tax credits, which are detailed there, and there are some requirements in terms of the level of usage that's required. You also want to look at both the production tax credit and the investment tax credit as opportunities.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, David. We have a question from Nikki. Is there much guidance around the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements in the ITC-based credit?
Yeah, there's preliminary guidance around prevailing wage and apprenticeships and the apprenticeship requirements. And again, that's something that could be found at the irs.gov website.
That's great. And just one last question. Are there projects in cities that might have been completed in 2023 that would qualify already?
Yes. So you'll be, if you've completed, again, it depends somewhat on how your taxable year is defined, but if you have completed projects in 2023, there are some cities that are moving forward with filing it for credits beginning in the 24 filing season. And I think one of the things, and I'll just sort of put in a plug for the panel that's about to come. I think you'll hear about some of that. I know from at least one of the folks on the panel.
That's great. Well, David, thank you again for all of the guidance you provided here today. Thanks so much.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you all.
Great. And before I introduce our next speakers, I have a quick plug about our upcoming boot camps. So as part of the local infrastructure hub support for small and mid-sized cities, we will be offering technical assistance to help cities learn how to take advantage of the tax credits we're talking about today to advance your climate priorities. Our experts will help city leaders through focused webinars, coaching sessions, and one-on-one consultations. The boot camps will kick off in February, and we encourage any city with a population of 150,000 residents or less to consider applying. You can click on the QR code on this slide in front of us right now, or visit the link in the chat. So a lot of great support we're going to provide to cities with 150,000 residents or less. Please consider applying. Now it's my privilege to welcome Amy Turner. She's the director of the city's climate law initiative at the Sabin Center. She is here to facilitate our city official panel. Thanks for being here, Amy. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, David. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. In particular, our three fantastic city panelists. We're going to do a bit of a moderated conversation. Then I'll provide some reflections on what we've learned so far today, and there will be more opportunity for Q&A when all of that is done. So please stay tuned for the full hour. I'd like to welcome our three panelists now. We have Mayor Rickenmann of Columbia, South Carolina, Elizabeth Babcock from the City of Denver, from the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And we have Doug Melnick, the Chief Sustainability Officer of San Antonio, Texas. And Elizabeth, I understand your time with us is somewhat short today, so I will send a question to you first, which I'd be really interested to hear from all of you. How having a climate action plan has really informed, some of your thinking around elective pay. How has it helped you be prepared to take advantage of elective pay funds? And really, what role did your existing climate action plan play in this new mix of this new federal landscape? So I'll start with Elizabeth.
Thanks, Amy. Great to be here with everybody. I would say that because a lot of our climate planning in Denver has been deeply engaged with our community, we have a really good understanding of what the community wants and expects from us in terms of climate action. So that's one pillar that really kind of helps orient where we're investing dollars. There's a very strong equity focus that has come out of all the planning that we've done, which has really helped us to determine how to shape projects that are both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping us achieve our climate goals while we're building resiliency in the community and achieving more equitable and just outcomes from that work. So that's another kind of pillar that I think has been really important for our planning to kind of help us. And then finally, I think the thing that's most relevant for this direct pay provision is we've had a really robust conversation, really driven by the community and a lot of visionary people across our community about how to fund the work. A lot of that conversation happened in 2019 and 2020. And so we were set up for success in some ways because we had a really good discussion about funding. So the people of Denver, the city council referred a ballot measure in 2020, and the people of Denver approved a 0.25% sales tax increase that's 100% dedicated towards equitable climate action. It goes into a special revenue fund that our office administers in Denver. And we have been able to then use that on a variety of different allowable uses under the fund, which includes renewable energy and battery storage, energy efficiency for buildings, fleet electrification, and a lot of different areas of work that are tied to some of these direct pay opportunities. So we were building a portfolio of projects going back to 2021 when we first started utilizing that money and budgeting around that money. So I think that the planning that we did really helped set us up for some success. But even if you don't have all of those pieces in place and you only have some of them, I think that you can get started, because there's a lot of models out there from other communities that can demonstrate how to make this work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll ask the same question of Mayor Rickenmann. How has some of your climate action planning work in Columbia informed what's to come from the elective pay program?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us and putting this all together to everybody. I will tell you, and much like Elizabeth said here a minute ago, having an action plan where the community is bought in and helping direct it really sets the pace. We have a climate protection action committee that's made up of residents, and those residents, along with business community members, got together and really helped us put a plan together, not only for the city and its city functions, but for our community as a whole, and making sure that we are touching every part. So as we went through a plan, it was everything from electrification of part of our fleet, doing R&G for another part of our fleet, because we're in a hurricane state. So we have to think strategically that we can't have all our responders on the grid. Looking at hydro, how do we take advantage of the three rivers that are in our community and reconstitute an old historic hydro plant that could provide 10 megawatts worth of power to one of our biggest users, which is our water treatment plant. Being able to add AD and start looking at enhancing the AD projects that we have at our wastewater plant, but adding a new one where we can go for food waste, grease trap waste, and yard waste to take advantage of things that we collect and take to a landfill and actually put them into use that can benefit the community. And one part of that takes it a step further, where instead of hauling our biosolids to a landfill 18 miles away, we're going to be able to dry those, pasteurize them, make them a Class A product, and pass those on along with other soil amendments that can go back out into the farming community. But, electrifying the grid, looking at fuel cells as we're generating different power sources and using those internally for our peak power months, especially in the summertime, because we're at about an 18.5 degree delta here in South Carolina, especially in Columbia. We just did a heat study back in August. So we know how to tie this all together. And this just came part by getting the community there. But our biggest challenge is how do you take, we were looking at one project at a time, 100 acres of solar for a wastewater plant. But now we can do the AD, the hydro, both solar on our garages, even wrapping our garages with some of the new technology that's come out of Germany that skins, and it actually is a solar panel. So you're not only adding a design dimension, but you're collecting the sun to help offset, but pulling all those pieces together because of the direct pay. And I think, as Mr. Cochran mentioned earlier, this was what happened in the early 2000s. It really jump-started businesses investing in renewable energy and solar and everything from geothermal to on. But for us, it takes us a step further now, because now as we're building attainable housing, we're taking advantage of, we're going to do solar thermal, so that we looking at the numbers and looking at long-term maintenance, as we're building homes for folks, we have the ability to use solar thermal, and then we can store that water much easier than we can with battery storage, and then have that ability to not only have the hot water storage for the home, but actually put in thermal radiant heat into the house and make those energy efficient, and then take advantage of the other tax credit that's out now for energy efficient appliances up to $5,000 per house. So really making an impact in our most challenged neighborhoods and setting them up in the future where they have energy efficient houses, and we're able to collect with the credits stacked up almost 70% on that. So for us, it's allowed us to create P3s. It's allowing us to do multiple projects at the same time. So we could have never gotten to this stage without having that planning ahead of time.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Rickenmann. Doug, can we turn to you for a moment? Can you tell us a bit about the city of San Antonio's plans for the use of the direct pay program, how you're thinking about it in San Antonio?
Yeah, thank you. We have a climate plan that was adopted in 2019. The advantage is it provides clear policy direction. And over the past few years, we've been outlining various programs and projects to try to meet those goals. What direct pay has done is has actually made some of those projects economically feasible. The big one that we had in process was a large municipal solar procurement. We took a look at all of our city buildings and we put out an RFP for over 100 sites. The value proposition that we needed to bring back to council was it needed to at least be cost neutral or revenue generating. And I don't know what we expected. I think we wanted to see what the market brought back, but our timing was perfect because direct pay has made this economically viable. It is basically, we're looking at about a 10-year payback and then a conservative estimate of $9 to $11 million in savings over a 25-year period. If the cost of power continues to go up, the savings will only increase. And again, if it wasn't for direct pay, those numbers wouldn't have worked out. So I definitely encourage folks on the call to take a look at your assets. This is a new tool that really is a game changer, and you all have assets that can generate. It's just evaluating them, assessing them, and getting them out to market, and leveraging these financial incentives that are there now.
Great, thank you, Doug. And that's a really nice segue. I'd like to hear a bit more from all three of you, really, about how you've made the financing or are planning to make the financing for some of these projects work. Obviously, elective pay offers a huge amount of the cost of these projects in some instances, but there's still a gap there, right? And so how are each of you thinking about how to finance these projects? And Mayor Rickenmann, I'll go to you first with that question.
Sure. I think for us, we looked at it as this opens up the door really to create public-private partnerships where we can partner with the private sector. One of the things that municipalities have always done in the past is got involved in a project, but it's not what we do today. So having ability to partner with somebody who does this routinely and that can be an O&M partner as well through the process really is allowing us to have a lot of flexibility, because the direct pay is our 30. That's our equity. That's the 30 to 50 to 70%, depending on the projects that goes into it. And so the private sector is bringing the debt and the know-how, and the ability by doing it in that section also helps us get over some of the what I would call hurdles, because sometimes it costs cities more to do projects because we have to go through so many stages of procurement. And by having a partner who can be able to do this and deliver us the finished goods saves us money as well. So the overall project becomes profitable. And by creating the project to get over, cost neutral is always what our plan is, but we have now opportunity to create revenue and we can split that with partners. So it's a win-win and incentive for all of us. And that seems to be our best approach, but also using the ability, like our hydro plant, reconstituting this plant allows me to save anywhere from $5 to $6 million in electrical costs, which then I can put back into other projects as well, not only just paying for the project that we're doing over that period of time. And that's taking advantage of the other part of this, which is the PTC, which is a per kilowatt. It's about 2.5 cents. and that's over a 10-year period. So that really helps you when you're going into the debt market as well in a partner. So that's our approach.
That's
Can I'm
fascinating.
just wondering
Thank
if
you.
I could just piggyback on that. If I
Of
can
course.
show one slide that might sort of show how we're structuring our deal. So Paige, can you show slide 6? Okay, so here's the capital stack for the project. You'll see on the red bar. This is for 42 sites. It's about just under 13 megawatts. They're all city-owned, a gross cost of just over $30 million. All of our projects meet the 30% direct pay base. So right off the top, just under $10 million is coming back. So that is huge. We also have one project that's located in an energy community, so we can capture those dollars. We're getting a state low-income loan through the state of Texas's Lone Star program. And then the remainder, just over $18 million, is going to be financed through bond debt. What's not captured in this is the potential for low-income direct pay incentives. Those are competitive. We applied for those, but we didn't want to include those into our economic assessment because they weren't guaranteed. But all of our projects qualify for just over another $2 million. So that would just add to the economic return. And again, our project would not have been as viable unless we had these incentives. So I just wanted to show you how it stacks up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. And Elizabeth, I know you have a slide potentially showing some of how this works as well. Would you like to share that? Or just whichever works for you.
Yeah, it doesn't speak to the capital stack in the same way, but it does show what the benefits are of the direct pay to projects. So, I will fully acknowledge we are kind of uniquely positioned with some of the funding we have. There are cities that do have some dedicated funding to these types of projects already in place. So they may be able to cover some of the upfront capital costs of making those investments, but we actually own and operate a number of our community solar projects. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to our community solar program. The state of Colorado, enables community solar, and our utility provides incentives for those projects. So we can bid into those projects. If our projects get selected, we can then build them. We are owning them, and then the long-term operations and maintenance is actually covered by the savings. So through community solar, we can subscribe our municipal facilities to that solar, and then we also share a portion of those bill credits with low-income customers in Denver. And our partnership is actually with Denver Public Schools to enroll income qualified families in the program. So that's that first list of projects here is our total investment, planned investment over time over the next 2023 through 2025 is 41 million. And then we've kind of broken it down with each project. We have a couple different projects we're doing with our recreation centers. We've done projects with our airport. We're doing a large agrivoltaics project with the Botanic Gardens, projects with public schools. So you can see what our total investment is. We've estimated the IRA direct pay for each of those projects based on the project type and what qualifiers it may contain in that project scope, and then estimated the direct pay value. And then you can see kind of the next portion of the list down. We have a program. So I'm going to drop first. This is the, I already dropped the link to the community solar program. So that's the first one on the top of the list. The next program we have is an incentive program. You can think of it like a grant program. We provide funding to human service providers, to nonprofits that provide any type of human service, whether it's housing, shelter, food bank, community clinic. They can apply for funding for solar and battery storage. They also qualify for direct pay, and we're encouraging them to then apply for the direct pay, pay themselves back for any investment they've made, and then refund our initial grant. So this is actually basically taking a program that we never had any intention of sort of earning anything back from, or having any kind of revolving fund. And now we're actually going to get money back from that program and even further reinvest in community-based nonprofits to really expand the impact of that program. We also are doing some ground source heat pumps, geothermal systems, and some of our bond projects. So those are the ones on the very bottom of the list. And those are coming in the future. So we've estimated around a 30% direct pay from those. So you can see potentially, you know, if we've done our math right and we kind of understand all the parameters, potentially up to $20 million back out of 54 million total investment through this program, which is really exciting.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And thank you, Doug. It's really powerful to see some of those numbers on the page. You can talk about it and then you see it and it really starts to add up. You know, we're all thinking about hurdles, right? Obstacles. So I want to hear what some of you all are experiencing in terms of, you know, obstacles to implementation of elective pay. Mayor Rickenmann, you talked about procurement. So I'll turn to you first. What sorts of obstacles are you finding and how are you dealing with those, or how do you plan to deal with them?
I think a lot of it is that we get in our own way sometimes with the procurement laws that we have and the costs that run up because we're doing engineering separate. We're doing this so that we make sure that, you know, we've reached out to everybody, but being able to do projects in a P3, especially on this type of level that we're doing, the multiple projects there are, the cost savings that we're going to see and the ability to move quickly so that we can get these timelines. You know, if you read quickly through the IRS piece there, I mean, a lot of this has to start, you got to start doing work by 24 so that you can get into service. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. I think, you know, one of the hurdles for us was obviously capital. And with the direct pay, that takes a lot of it out. I mean, you just saw the 2 slides from San Antonio and Denver, and you see the impact. And I look at our numbers, you know, we're talking about saving probably somewhere between $25 and $28 million when we're done with all our projects. That's significant money. That made these projects come alive. We were going to have to choose 1 or 2 to do over a period of time. This has accelerated our timeline, I think probably more than anything else that we've encountered. So I think the major hurdle got taken away thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. And, you know, for me, I think those were the 2 biggest hurdles for us was timeline and getting things out, getting things procured, and then getting to construction phase. You know, internally, and because a lot of the power we're generating and the projects we're doing, we're using internally. So it took away the hurdle of having to deal with the grid and the interconnection, which if you saw in here also is something that if you have direct pay can cover the cost of that too, which that also can be very significant depending on where you're wheeling the power for or where you're having to make those connection points. Our power company and our public service commission here is not moving as swiftly as they need. We have a lot of projects that are on the sideline. And so as we went to eliminate those so that we could use the power internally, that was another hurdle that we were able to take out. But I would say capital was the biggest.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Elizabeth, I've got a question for you. So, you know, in order to move these projects along through the elective pay process, right, you've got to coordinate with some different agencies within your government, including a finance department or comparable agency. And I know that this is something that you've been focused on. I was wondering if you could share perhaps some of the wisdom you've gleaned about the interagency cooperation that's needed here.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We started working with our Department of Finance pretty early on after we did just some initial high-level evaluation of the program and the potential for us. They were really excited about it. And we've worked through a process with them already to kind of set up a system by which we can receive the money. So they were very interested in, even though our understanding is, you know, there aren't a lot of specific requirements tied to the payment that we're receiving, unlike a grant. They still wanted to make sure that they're capturing this as a sort of a separate stream of revenue and making sure that it's also tagged as federal funding. And so what we did was we set up, we had to take a bill to City Council that was written by Department of Finance in partnership with our office to create a special revenue fund called our, I think it's like Climate Federal Revenue. So that's where the direct payments, once they're received, would be deposited. It's an operating fund. And we also created at the same time a companion capital fund. So if we want to use the funding for operational related things, we've kind of detailed what that money can be spent on within the city. So at a high level, we kind of, in the bill language, the ordinance that went to council, we said it would be for clean energy projects like building electrification, fleet electrification, renewable energy, battery storage, energy studies or planning. So even though, again, that's not necessarily a requirement, we kind of put some parameters around it because we wanted to make sure that we're using it to kind of reinvest in these projects over time. So it will come into the operating fund. If it's an operating expense, it would be spent out of there, or we can transfer money over to the capital side and then reinvest in capital projects that way. So that system's already been set up in place with the partnership of Department of Finance. So once we're ready to apply and then receive the money, we'll already have that kind of internal system in place.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that experience. I'm going to have Doug close us out now. Doug, give us some advice here. What advice do you have for cities about how they can use direct pay, and, you know, what would just give us your wisdom here.
Yeah, no, one, I would definitely reaffirm Elizabeth's focus on interdepartmental collaboration. I mean, that's one of the things we started in the beginning. We created a solar, delivery team working across departments, identifying buildings, identifying projects, but also bringing our public utilities and our finance team along, because we've never done this before. It was definitely a learning experience, similar to Elizabeth. The dollars are going to go into a special revenue fund that we've created. It's been focused on energy efficiency in city buildings, but we're going to be capturing the savings, and then that'll be covering the debt as well as O&M, and then any additional revenue that'll come forward will be reinvested into additional projects. But I think my last recommendation is think big. Now's the time to try to take advantage of these dollars while they're here. And again, also to sort of echo Elizabeth's work in Denver, really look at what this means from an equity perspective. Really look at how your community, particularly those that are left behind traditionally, can be centered in this. The other big thing that we worked into our project is workforce development and job training. Basically, it's not enough just to put these projects in low-income neighborhoods. Who's receiving the benefit? So I would say just really think big, collaborate across the organization, and make sure that you're centering your work in those who really need to be benefiting the most.
Great. Well, thank you, Doug. And I'd really like to thank our fantastic panelists for an inspired and I think really helpful conversation. Mayor Rickenmann, Elizabeth, and Doug, thank you for your time and your generosity in sharing your city's experiences with us all. We will take a couple of audience questions in a few moments. This is obviously a time when we're all still figuring out elective pay, how it will work, how we'll use it. And, I think it's extremely helpful to hear your thought processes in real time. It's been particularly interesting to me to hear the varied ways that you plan to use the tax credits that are payable through elective pay. We've heard about several different iterations of renewable energy development, some clean vehicle work. All of these can be structured to qualify for the elective pay. And it's been really elucidating to hear you're thinking about how these fit in with your existing climate plans. I think there's a lot of room for cities to develop projects to qualify with the existing the new tax credits, and your work to date to pave the way for that. Ongoing and future thinking by other local governments and communities around the country is really helpful. Obviously, this is something we're all learning about in real time. There are going to be some hurdles along the way. So I think these opportunities for peer learning are going to be so important. And certainly this will not be the last one. I was also very glad to hear from our federal government expert, David. We're all waiting with bated breath for the online pre-filing registration portal to get these projects registered and ready for filing. So it's great to hear that it is coming in the next few weeks. I know there are more than a few people on this call waiting for the final IRS rules for electing and receiving direct pay. I always want to reiterate to folks that the current elective pay rules are both proposed and preliminary. And that means they're in effect now. So you can rely on them in making these claims, these early claims for elective pay. Hopefully we'll get some clarity on some outstanding questions in the revised rules, but you can rely on these rules and you can rely on the credits. There are a few other things I have on my mind as I think about the implementation of elective pay going forward, and I hope that we can, continue to have these peer learning sessions and continue to hear from federal experts as some of these questions evolve. One is the gap in financing that many of these projects will need to fill between the outlay of the project expenses and the receipt of the elective payment, the actual cash payment. That interim period could be, several months to significantly over a year, depending on when the costs are expended and how a municipality's filing deadlines align in that particular year. And I think local governments are going to handle this all different ways, right? Some, like some of the folks on our panel, will, pay for the projects upfront and then treat the cash payment as sort of a bonus. And if this describes your situation, you and your teams will need to figure out what to do with that money once it comes in. But others, of course, won't have that luxury. And so we'll need to see some financing products develop over time. For local governments that are in search of these kinds of financing projects, we'll really need to watch and see what sorts of financing options become available. One thing that I'm watching really closely is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the so-called Green Bank program that the EPA is administering. I think there's, this is a time to sort of pay attention to how those evolve, and that we don't know who the so-called green banks will be. This would be a good time for local governments to get to know the CDFIs or other community lenders within their communities. David Eichenthal, our federal speaker, spoke earlier about the way these credits can stack or combine for a larger credit as well. And I think there are still some open questions about implementation. The low-income communities bonus credit, for example, for which the federal government has a limited allocation, both for 2023 and 2024, was oversubscribed by 4 times. So there's a lot of interest in this low-income communities bonus credit. And agency decision makers are going to need to figure out how they're going to tier or choose among these applications for the 2024 allocation. There are also, for larger scale projects, questions about the domestic content criteria. And so for local governments considering projects over 1 megawatt, you'll need to pay very close attention to those domestic content criteria in future years. So, that's what's on my mind when it comes to elective pay. We learned so much during this presentation and the panel discussion. And I know there are a lot of questions coming in the chat. So I'm going to turn things back over to David to close us out. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and thanks to all of our speakers today. Before we end our session, we're going to ask you all to complete a quick Zoom poll, which will pop up on your screens right now. And while you're filling out the poll, just want to share some updates with you. First, you can find a link in
I think we're going to do the Q&A
resource.
First. Dave, I think we're going to do the Q&A first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Q&A. Sorry, we have some questions in the chat. So Brendan, we have a question from you. Completed. Do you want to ask your question, Brendan?
And Brendan, I think
sure.
the question you had asked,
yeah.
I think was particularly the one about sharing some guidance with cities. Because I know you had a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah, the 2022 was answered. I was just curious, the panelists, like if there's any things, guidance they would have or that would help them when they were doing projects. I'm sorry, I can't see the thing, so if there's a particular question I should ask. But just also curious about green banks. It seemed like that was mentioned with the EPA. If there was a way philanthropic organizations have a green bank that's repaid from the direct pay incentives to some degree, so they could put up upfront money for nonprofits or partners. And then the other question was just any tribal organizations that some cities are working with, because they can have their own grants, and just curious on partnerships there. Sorry, that was a lot.
Amy, do you want to take a crack, or other
Sure,
panel?
I'll start with the green banks question. I mean, we're all watching this closely. So there are a handful of green banks in the country that already exist. The EPA is also funding a very large green banking program, and we don't know who those green bank entities will be yet. They will, they'll fund between, a couple and maybe a dozen or so green banking entities. And that application process is, still under review. So we don't know who those entities are. What I would advise at this time is getting to know your local CDFI or other local community or nonprofit lenders, because they will be administering some of the green bank funds, we think. We don't know yet, but that's sort of our best guess. But this is definitely an area I'm watching closely. I totally agree with you. That would be a great financial product for a green bank to offer.
Great. Thank you, Amy. We have a question from John Ortega. And the question is, we are partnering on a clean hydrogen project with our local electric cooperative. If we both apply, is the direct pay stackable? Who can tackle that one?
I can. So first of all, whoever owns the project applies for the direct pay, and for the most part, partnerships are not eligible. So I would confer with an attorney as to whether what you're proposing is eligible. Whoever applies for it, it's not like you can get 30 plus 30 and that makes 60, if that's the question.
Got it. Another question, is there a new pot of money allocated for the low-income bonus provision each fiscal year? Or has that been said in the IRA law already?
I don't want to be the one to answer all the questions.
David, are you able to answer that one for us?
David Eichenthal?
Yes. Not you, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I don't have a good answer to that question. I could refer people to a release that Treasury and Energy just put out with regard to the low-income community bonus, and actually sent that along to folks from Results for America, along with some of the answers to the other questions.
That's great. And we'll make sure to get that out to all of you.
Yeah, and just the quick answer to that question. So it's for 2023 and 2024 only, and there is a megawatt capacity allocation. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but there's a certain number of megawatts for which that can be allocated for the low-income communities program.
That's great. With that, 2:59, we have 4 important updates. Please fill out the Zoom poll if you haven't already. In the chat, you can also find a link to a new resource we've created that outlines how direct pay works, shares example projects and eligibility requirements, and more. Secondly, this Thursday, in 2 days at 2 p.m. Eastern, we will be hosting a session on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, which will be providing $5 billion in grants to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful air pollutions. Third, if you come from a city of 150,000 residents or less, please consider joining our boot camps. Amy and others will be there to help answer any questions you may have. And fourth, be sure to check out our website, localinfrastructure.org, with answers to a lot of these questions and other slide presentations. So we thank you for your time today. We shared a lot of information. Thanks again to our panelists, David, Amy, Mayor, and others. Thank you so much.